trabajo, sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions.
Muy buenos días, señoras y señores. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Rogamos a los candidatos y las candidatas, por favor, que se acerquen a la mesa principal y a las delegaciones.
We would like to ask the delegations to please take their seats.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We ask all candidates kindly come to the main desk, to the main table, and we ask all delegations kindly take their seats so we may start our session this morning.
Bom dia. Após a verificação do quórum.
Good morning. Having verified quorum by the Secretariat, I'm honored to open this special session of the Permanent Council, convened pursuant to the mandate laid out in Resolution 3028 of the GA.
Com o objetivo de ouvir as apresentações.
We will be hearing the presentations from the candidates to the ICHR for the period 2026-2029. Their elections will be carried out during the first regular period of sessions of the GA. On behalf of the permanent councils, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to our candidates who are with us this morning. Pursuant to Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure, I submit for consideration by the Permanent Council the draft order of business, document CPOD-2548/25. There are no requests for the floor, and so we will consider that adopted. Before we continue, I would like to express our condolences to the Uruguayan delegation for the passing of former President Pepe Mujica, who dedicated his life to building a fairer world with more solidarity. He was an example of commitment, dedication, and wisdom, and he will continue to inspire current and future generations. And I would like to ask the Permanent Council for 1 minute of silence.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. Pursuant to the methodology for presenting candidates to the ICHR and the Court of Human Rights to the Permanent Council, adopted by this Council in its regular session on August 25th, 2021, document CP/Doc 5719/21 Rev 1, the procedures for this meeting will be as follows. First of all, we will hear presentations from the candidates in the order set forth based on the date in which the respective candidate was presented to the Secretary General. The candidates all will have a 10-minute period. I would like to ask them to please respect that time frame because we have programmed the microphones to turn off after exactly 10 minutes. Then we will open the floor for Q&A from the member states. They will have a maximum of 5 minutes for questions and/or comments. I'd like to ask the delegations, and as much as possible, to express your questions or comments generally and not for a specific candidate. Finally, we will give the floor to the candidates for in the same order of their presentation for responding and final comments, and they will be able to have the microphone for a maximum of 7 minutes. So I would like to give the floor now to the candidate Maria Clara Galvez Patino from Colombia first. Please go ahead.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Warm greetings to the permanent representatives and alternate representatives. Also, warm greetings to my colleagues, Jose Luis, Reina, Fabio, Rosa Maria, and Carlos. The OAS member states have in their hands the opportunity to ensure that each of the individuals who make up the Commission has knowledge, experience, high moral authority, and a commitment to human rights. I would like to join the ICHR to continue doing what I have done now for over 3 decades, that is, defending human dignity with conviction, commitment, knowledge, rigor, and sensitivity. Now, I am aspiring to do that from a body that has a regional scope and allows us to protect the human rights of millions in the hemisphere, while also contributing to improving institutional design, standards, and practices in OAS member states. I am Maria Clara Galvez Patino, and I am presenting myself to you today as Colombia's candidate to the ICHR. I have broad, diverse professional experience dedicated exclusively to defending human rights from international law at the national level, at the inter-American level, and at the universal level. My professional experience has allowed me to work with all stakeholders with which the Commission interacts: states, civil society, victims of human rights violations in UN treaty bodies, academia, and even with international cooperation. In the next few minutes, I'd like to share with all of you my vision on the mandate of the Commission, what should be preserved, what could be improved, and what topics the Commission should focus on in the coming years. The mandate of the Commission is established in the founding instruments of the Inter-American System. The OAS Charter assigns the Commission the responsibility of promoting the defense of human rights. This is a cross-cutting function because the regime of freedom, social justice, which were designed by those who founded the OAS and drafted the Charter, was based specifically on respecting those rights. The IACHR is competent for knowing anything related to fulfilling the commitments shouldered by states according to Article 33 of the Inter-American Convention. There are several ways in which the Commission can exercise that competency, and my vision is a Commission that works closely with the states, that works to support them in fulfilling their international commitments. This task requires knowledge of those commitments, knowledge of the legal systems in the states, and a willingness to listen and dialogue. These are the strengths that we have, and I have robust knowledge of inter-American law. I am very familiar with the mechanisms of the Inter-American Commission. I am deeply convinced that in order to draft recommendations that are relevant, it's indispensable for us to understand how the legal system works in the country where we would like to implement them. When I joined the UN Committee Against Forced Disappearances, I had the opportunity to study legal systems from many different countries in Latin America, Asia, Europe, Africa. I am familiar, therefore, with the continental and Anglo-Saxon legal systems that are in place in many countries of our region. I am a person who knows how to listen, to dialogue, and to relate with all stakeholders of the system, and in particular with the states, because I have worked from the states. I can provide the Commission with these skills, which I have built over my career. I am highly aware that there are aspects of the Commission that need to be improved. Some of you have expressed your concern with the way it is managed. The short time frames available to respond, not knowing in advance when they will be communicating a decision, not being familiar with the criteria for fulfilling recommendations. Some of you have comments and concerns over the methodology used by the Commission in its reports. It's possible, and I staunchly believe, that we can resolve these concerns and others by talking. The roadmap to doing that is through constructive, effective dialogue, and that requires time and patience. In the Commission, I will work to identify what can be improved and how to do so hand in hand with all of you. I'd like to contribute to consolidating the progress that we have made over 65 years of the Commission's existence and contribute to building responses to the new challenges. The Commission's mechanisms have evolved. For example, the friendly resolution, which just a few years ago only existed on paper, has now taken life. And that allows petitioners and states to work together to build effective solutions with shorter time frames than those involved in a contentious case. Certainly, this is a practice we should uphold and even deepen. When it comes to the thematic agenda, I'd like to mention one theme from the original agenda and two from the current agenda. It's indispensable for the Commission to continue to address an essential topic which is on its agenda and has been since its origins, that is respect for the life of all human beings, as noted in Article 1 of the Inter-American Declaration of Human Rights. In some countries of our region, we continue to see serious human rights violations, such as forced disappearances, arbitrary detention, torture. To see a region where life for all human beings is respected without distinction is my goal. For 30 years, I have been working to make that a reality. Since 2026, I would like to continue to contribute to addressing new challenges for protection presented by today's world, such as AI and the climate crisis, which is in itself a human rights crisis. The Inter-American Commission has already addressed these topics. Last March, it convened a hearing on AI and human rights, and in December of last year, it published a resolution on climate change and displacement in the region. In the coming years, the Commission should therefore work to deepen protection for human rights in these contexts. And as Commissioner, I will aspire to hearing all perspectives on these systems and holding fruitful dialogue, allowing the Commission to address these issues with a regional perspective, because these are situations that have an impact on every single one of our states in the hemisphere, of course, with different intensities. The Commission is the jewel on the crown. Preserving its autonomy and independence is vital to ensuring, without distinction of any type, the human rights enshrined in the Inter-American Declaration on Human Rights and the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. The autonomy and independence of the Commission requires that each member is also autonomous and independent. I'm an independent person. I have not worked with the executive or legislative powers. My work in Colombia was with legal bodies and with what we call bodies for controlling the executive branch. It is quite clear to me that the commissioners must exercise their mandate personally, independently of public powers. To conclude, I would like to respectfully submit to all of you for your consideration my candidacy with the conviction that I am the ideal candidate for commissioner. As I stated at the outset, I have over 3 decades of professional experience and a commitment throughout my life to respecting the inherent dignity to all human beings without distinction. Thank you very much.
Obrigado.
Thank you, and now I will give the floor, a welcome, and the floor, again for 10 minutes, to candidate Jose Luis Caballero Ochoa from Mexico. I give you the floor. Good morning. Warm greetings to the chair of the IACHR, Ambassador Benoni Belli. Warm greetings to permanent representatives to the OAS and observer countries, Assistant Secretary General. Warm greetings to the Secretary General and the Executive Secretariat of the Commission, civil society, candidates. I greet you. I am Jose Luis Caballero Ochoa from Mexico, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present myself to all of you for your consideration on the role played by the IACHR today and the role that the commissioners must play in this particularly complex era. I think that the IACHR needs to be strengthened and supported through dialogue and the vote of confidence to continue providing its service as it has for over 65 years now. I would like to, first of all, remind you all, and it's worth noting, that our region is committed to, over the last 7 years, moving toward fundamental goals that we cannot give up, creating international law for human rights, multilateralism centered on individuals, building effective international mechanisms for protecting human rights, and also building a common denominator of inter-American law for common use in line with standards from the Commission and legal standards and precedent from the court. Along these lines, the Commission has played a coherent, important role on this path. And I would like to continue contributing to this full mandate, which bases its effectiveness and its attributes. This is a complex, unique, virtuous axis of this jewel in the crown, diplomacy for human rights. It builds avenues for diplomatic action and dialogue, addressing the individual characteristics faced by each state in working to promote conventional law and the entire inter-American legal corpus, with a view toward victims at the very heart of its activities, those who have been excluded from political positions and exercise of their rights, groups subjected to marginalization, which are not represented or even persecuted for trying to exercise their human rights. And against this backdrop, I value, appreciate, and consider the work to come in this second period to which I am aspiring as vital. That is effort and dialogue. First of all, respect for the regulatory timeframes in presenting reports. And the charter in Article 41 in the statute has established this, and I think that it has moved forward, but we must be very cautious and understand that we need to extend requests for an extension whenever appropriate. Second consideration, dialogue should not be interrupted even in the most sensitive moments. We must always be open. This means that states must maintain their conviction and adherence to the system through their commitment to guaranteeing human rights and evolving inter-American public order. This is based on appearances at hearings, press releases, openness in issuing precautionary measures, and even driving friendly conflict resolutions and agreements for fulfillment in which there is an opportunity. This is a huge opportunity to move forward with justice and reparations. Third consideration, driving follow-up mechanisms for recommendations has been a very effective component of the work by the Commission and also promoting a positive agenda. Fourth consideration, the attention to regional specificities. The strategy with the Caribbean must be strengthened as we drive ratification of the treaties and technical cooperation in dialogue on legal diversity and the more effective presence of individuals from the Caribbean in various spaces of the Inter-American Commission. On the other hand, we need to talk about technical efficiency and timely attention from justice. The Commission is a body which makes it possible for access to justice, both for cases received and resolved by the Commission, as well as by the use carried out by the court. Therefore, this is nothing new. This is a very legitimate concern, perhaps, that which is most felt by the states, academia, civil society, and anyone interested in the inter-American system. Building it back requires more dialogue between states and their domestic capacities, petitioners, and the Inter-American Commission. It also depends on deploying the efforts put forth with undeniable results, which were published in 2023, 124 in 2024. And thanks to maintaining the chronological order, which should be increased, but also we see resolutions adopted by the Commission in order to reduce procedural timeframes and to implement a policy of prioritization. I believe, therefore, that this deliberate work has been carried out in virtuous electronic platform, which this year already has over 1,700 consultations, thematic reports, country reports, press releases, precautionary measures, reports on admissibility, and others. This is essential, and I believe that one challenge is that the Commission is moving forward with more and better technological tools at its disposal, which we will be able to incorporate on the ground with AI. The technique that is dialogue with states, the technique of resolutions, reducing timeframes, as well as the interpretation, rigorous interpretation of standards for adopting the content on human rights. No less and no more. Integrating approach that allows us to work with the bodies of the system, but also to develop human rights law in states, and which allows us to move forward, structuring, as we have over the last several decades, and as we address new challenges at all times in democratic constitutional states with rule of law, as we face issues related to representative democracy, the rule of law, institutionality, democracy, and which provides us with the opportunity to exercise human rights as noted in the Inter-American Democratic Charter. And on the other hand, the perspective of interdependence, universality, progressivity of rights to ensure greater effectiveness and of economic, social, environmental, and economic rights, as noted by the thematic special rapporteur, with a view toward climate change or environmental damage, structural poverty, full justice pursuant to Article 26 of the Inter-American Charter in the system of cases and petitions, as we have already seen since 2013. Being on the Commission requires a view toward serene dialogue, considering political capital and a human rights perspective to resolve cases, without a personal agenda, external influence, or political pressure, but rather a focus on the mandates and Inter-American legal corpus, working closely with the executive secretariats and the team of professionals that carry out the robust work of the Commission, and strategically working to develop all of this. We must have preventive diplomacy, technical cooperation, and a positive agenda with the states. We must address the regulatory obligations and statutory obligations, and that is where my own perspective comes in and my commitment. Thank you very much.
Em seguida, dou
Thank you very much. Now we'll give a warm welcome and grant the floor to candidate Rivera Hoya from Honduras for 10 minutes. I give you the floor. Thank you very much, Chair of the Permanent Council, distinguished representatives of the member states accredited at the OAS, permanent observers from international organizations, Inter-American organizations, representatives of civil society, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to speak to all of you in this space for hemispheric dialogue, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present my candidacy to the IACHR and to share my beliefs. I'm an attorney a Honduran, a mother of an 18-year-old son who every day reminds me of the need to fight for a more fair world, and I have dedicated my personal and professional life to defending human rights, to working over the last 30 years with the state, civil society, and international cooperation. At the level of the state, I've been working as a judge, a family court judge and criminal court judge. And I have also worked in the Attorney General's office of my country as an advisor at the Attorney General's Office for Human Rights and the Environment, as well as a human rights prosecutor carrying out initial investigations during the years of crimes of the past, particularly during the 1990s. I have worked very closely with survivors and family members of victims. I have been working, advising on public policies independently as a consultant nationally on human rights and gender equality, as well as providing proposals for drafting laws in different areas related to human rights. I spent 14 years working with civil society organizations, working to found a human rights organization with specialization in supporting the defense of human rights of vulnerable groups, strengthening working with transparency and fighting transparency, as well as providing human rights education, particularly to public security and military forces.
And I have also worked with civil society, and that is what I became very close to at a time in my country, in Mexico, of great political complexity back in 2009. All of us, even those of us who had not chosen that particular practice, had to decide whether yay or nay. It wasn't time to stand up for the Inter-American system, and most of us said yes. Last couple of years, I've worked much more specifically in the international arena, preparing documents on gender equality, citizen participation, the environment, you have it, and also, naturally, the response to COVID and other environmental challenges that are ever upon us, supporting and pushing and bolstering civil society and others. I think that over these last years in my professional career, perhaps one of the more substantive contributions has been to set up a private emergency fund that has helped dozens of defenders in my country, particularly at the level of communities and the environment. I have been the technical advisor of women on gender issues in my country, and I also come before you today as a candidate for Central America. This is an area with more than 65 million people that have ever been underrepresented, dear friends, in my judgment, in the Indo-American system. It's a complex situation, no question. There's multilateralism. There's very often the abandonment of collaborative work by many, many countries. And for all that reason, we're going through challenging times. In the last Inter-American report, the point is made that we have structural challenges that express themselves differently in different regions, different countries, and in some places more and more rooted. Inequality, violence, discrimination, inter alia are an ongoing challenge, to be sure. But beyond that, there is ongoing stigmatizing language, don't we know it, that is denigrating to women, to LGBTI, to the young, to students, who needs them. And so the point is, the challenge is greater and the room to maneuver ever smaller. Given this complex reality, the Inter-American Committee stands for a move forward. And this is what has been happening. However, the committee itself has a challenge, a set of challenges, I might say, in the plural, of its own. Back in 2024, the Commission received more than 4,000 petitions for precautionary measures, 4,000 plus. More than half of them have not received, or a huge number of them in any event, have not received response to date. and so particularly at the levels of admissibility and substance. On the substantive reports, friendly solutions were found in many cases and in some remitted to the court, but that is insufficient, I'm afraid it has to be said, given a backlog that could last a good 4 or 5 years. And so we cannot simply allow measures that, for lack of being taken, permit or somehow allow impunity. Now, we understand there are financial difficulties. In 2024, the Commission operated more or less with 22 million plus, give or take, of budget, 22 million. However, 29% of that budget actually, the interpreter grants us, 51% comes from specific cooperation or countries, and the balance only from the organization. This means that at the end of the day, financially, the strategic planning that has to occur in the long term is simply not being carried out with the solidity that it requires. So aware of all of these elements, and given my knowledge of NGOs and interference on the part of many international powers, I believe that the Inter-American Commission is facing structural challenges that are certainly not smaller than ever before, perhaps to the contrary. I've been struck, as I updated my own and refreshed my memory on the planning of the Inter-American Commission, I was surprised, I'm going to say flat out, that there was not a specific rapporteurship to deal with democratic crises and urgent emergencies, let us say, not urgent situations, but flat out emergencies. We believe we need a special rapporteurship on observance, so that early warning systems, as it were, might be duly and timely made. That, we believe, would facilitate a preventive use of the system and make a difference in how well and how effectively we can intervene in cases that are structural as well as others. Secondly, I want to say that there has to be a strengthening in the capacity of the countries themselves for the appropriate use of the petition system. At universities, at law schools, people need to know, they have to be more in the know how this works. We need to reduce frustrations where possible and do what we can to make sure that grave violations, wherever they occur, are given priority in the Commission. They're not just one more file that we'll get to eventually. There have to be friendly settlements, ready and able to be taken effectively. And here, I would suggest that the Specialized University of the Americas in Human Rights should participate in mediation, but only under this aegis, through informed knowledge by the victim about that mechanism. Victim has to agree. And secondly, an intermediation of that agreement to such entities of the system that might not be able to intervene directly and therefore must delegate its functions. This, I think, would facilitate and boost access to inter-American justice. Finally, from my experience with regard to international experience and the role of inter-American systems, I think there should be a role with donors that will facilitate better support for the 24-27. It is not sustainable that over the last 2 years, more than 70 reports had to be made to donors. This is a great burden and limits the manner and the room with which essential mandates must be attended to. I would hope to be a member of the Inter-American Commission in full knowledge of the ethical challenge it poses, and with humanity, with great cooperation with the states and civil society, the breadth and width of this hemisphere. I thank you very much. Thank you, Madam, says the Chair. I'm very pleased to give Marian Bethany the floor. Representative for the Bahamas, you have the floor, Madam. Bahamas is recognized.
Good morning to all of us here. Secretary General Almago, Assistant Secretary General Mendez, Ambassador Abelli, Chair of the Permanent Council, permanent and alternate representatives, observers, again, a good morning and greetings from the Bahamas. I thank you for inviting me and my fellow nominees this morning to address you in regard to our vision, proposals, and initiatives if we are elected as commissioners to the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. Having been a member of the UN CEDAW Committee for 8 years and attending to compliance and monitoring of the Human Rights Convention in regard to some 190 states parties, I would welcome the opportunity to engage with my own region of the Americas in a more focused, sustained, and intimate manner as a commissioner of the IACHR. As a member of the UN CEDAW Committee, I used my knowledge of international law and human rights to analyze state party reports and undertake constructive dialogue with states parties. This work sought to implement the CEDAW Convention and to strengthen the legal protections for women and girls and to advance their human rights during times of peace, war, conflict, and humanitarian crises. Further, I brought to bear my knowledge, analysis, and research skills to examine petitions, communications submitted by petitioners alleging violations of rights protected under the Convention. I also participated in chairing the conduct of field investigations and visits to countries where there were allegations of grave or systemic violations of human rights. I am particularly motivated to bring the breadth of my experience to the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights and to be responsive to the needs and concerns of all member states and to engage fully with civil society in order to advance and accelerate the pace of human rights compliance in the Americas. As a national from the Bahamas, a small island developing state, I am fully aware of the challenges posed by macroeconomic and fiscal fragility and environmental vulnerability as the context within which Caribbean states and peoples in particular attempt to respect, protect, and fulfill our human rights obligations. Further, the Caribbean subregion of the Americas is one where the legacies of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade continue to shape and define access to justice and the enjoyment of human rights. I am also aware that the same challenges are evident in the larger region of the Americas. In this context, if elected to the Commission, a main priority would be to promote the Commission's continued focus on environmental, economic, social, and cultural rights as a vital component of addressing a myriad of inequalities, discrimination, and development challenges across the entire region. I would wish to contribute to maintaining the Commission's critical relevance in an environment fraught with extreme vulnerability for specific populations which experience persistent discrimination based on ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic status, gender identity, sexual orientation, and more. It is my view that the human rights focus must be broader than civil and political rights and include greater attention to the interdependence and interconnected nature of human rights. The Inter-American system continues to be at the forefront of the international human rights movement, developing norms, standards, and frameworks, and the extension of international human rights law. Nonetheless, threats to human rights persist in the Americas and are being challenged in the context of the weakening of democratic institutions, the rule of law, and civil society engagement in the process of the protection of human rights. The IACHR has a crucial role to play in ensuring full adherence by states to their human rights obligations and commitments in the face of growing social dislocation, poverty, and reduced fiscal capacity. If elected, I will draw on my knowledge and practice of international human rights law, working closely with fellow commissioners to ensure that the Commission maintains its relevance in responding to the current challenges. In this regard, I would wish to promote a collaborative approach and deepened regional engagement in the work of the IACHR. My commitment would be to fostering a constructive, consultative, and collaborative approach to dialogue with member states, national human rights institutions, civil society organizations, and international partners. This approach has to be anchored in mutual respect and the building of trust. I view this approach as the most effective and sustainable pathway to advancing, protecting, and fulfilling human rights in the Americas. In addition, I would wish to promote a collegial and consensus-building culture within the IACHR as a commissioner. Based on a review of the IACH reports, there appear to be several recurring issues, including underfunding, lack of political will by some member states, the petitions backlog, procedural delays, and non-compliance by states parties. I also see that the IACHR and the Commissioners evidence their ongoing determination to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and legitimacy of the human rights system, and in particular the Commission. Specifically, the Commission has sought to reduce delay in the consideration and disposition of petitions, to increase the number of friendly settlements, to engage in sustained interaction with member states for capacity building at a national level, and to support state compliance more generally. The foregoing seems to me to be the challenges that the IACHR continues to address. My position in regard to reform is that it must be grounded in direct and hands-on experience in the work of the Commission. It is important for me to understand firsthand and appreciate through direct practice where the specific weaknesses are, what reforms may be needed, and the specific nature of the reforms. And so I think I would be better able to address the issue of specific reforms after my exposure to the work in the IACHR. No doubt, reforms have to advance transparency, practicality, and enhancement of our work and mandate of the Commission. A periodic review by the IACHR of its standard operating procedures may be a sustainable approach to addressing reforms. This review should be in consultation with member states, consensus-driven, and reflective of the realities within which the IACHR delivers on its mandate. As an IACHR Commissioner, I would advance deepening our engagement with the Caribbean region. The IACHR has repeatedly articulated its commitment to greater and more effective monitoring of human rights in the Caribbean. The legitimacy of the IAHRS is also challenged by limited ratification of the American Convention and other inter-American human rights treaties. While all countries in the region are subject to the Commission's jurisdiction via the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man, there are many countries, including Caribbean countries, that are not signatories to the American Convention on Human Rights. In this regard, I would promote increased visibility and awareness of the scope and content of the Commission's work in order to facilitate increased engagement by member states and civil society organizations in the inter-American system. In closing, I would welcome the opportunity to be a member of the IACHR and to participate in ensuring that the IACHR remains a credible and inclusive body that promotes justice, accountability, and institutional integrity, and that we affirm our shared values of democratic ideals and aspirations, the rule of law, and human worth and dignity. I thank the Bahamas government for nominating me and reposing this confidence in me, and I extend profound thanks to the CARICOM states for their endorsement of me as a candidate. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you so very much, Madam. And I would like to welcome and give a 10-minute scope for Fábio Ferreira Silva of Brazil. Brazil is recognized.
Muito obrigado, senhor presidente.
Chair, a very good morning and greetings to all of my colleagues.
Represented here. Muito obrigado pelo.
Thank you much again for the time that you are giving me to present to you my position. What I think I would bring, what I do bring, I believe, to this candidacy, first of all, of course, is a deep international commitment. Let me tell you, I was born in Brazil in the 80s. And Brazil in the 80s was a process of democratization in the make. And indeed, that's a time when the Pact of San Jose was just taking shape. And the ideas of rights that transcend others that had been accepted from forever were beginning to be sensed. And in the 90s, when I studied law, I learned quickly that very often, you know, human rights national rights, it seemed the same. People didn't really clearly see the difference. Well, there is a difference, and my candidacy here is rooted in my sense of human rights as I have gathered it in different platforms, in different contexts, where in the state of Brazil, I was Minister of Justice. Later, I worked in the prison system and subsequently had a hand in very important policy for people deprived of liberty, particularly in prison, and the sense of communities that needed to have their recognition, sacred recognition virtually, of their right to vote. Not to mention my participation in the work of different groups, the International Bar Association, UNDP, UNESCO, and numbers of others, not least this very organization. And from that experience, I learned two important things, I believe. First of all, states are not in and of themselves violators of human rights. They are intrinsic violators. They are complex entities. That has to be recognized, and therefore have different approaches to human rights. And from the standpoint of international bodies, it behooves these latter to keep an eye on them and track that things are where they need to be. One other lesson I believe that I've gathered along the way is that particularly in delicate areas such as persons deprived of liberty, dialogue is essential. My first week of work at the Ministry of Justice, there was a rebellion against Russo Branco in the Brazilian state of Rondônia, and the Indo-American system weighed with regard to the violations that were occurring. And what I'm trying to say here is dialogue with the system, capital S, that is the human rights system, means having a dialogue with your own system. One is not exclusive of the other, far to the contrary. And I learned that in Brazil personally with regard to both, to my country and to the Indo-American system. That's point one. Secondly, I bring a multidisciplinary approach to this task. I have expression in many different areas of not only the law, but public science and different cultural issues. I carried out field research in Latin America, and I also taught in the United States at a particular point in time, and particularly in the area of common law. Now, as has been said repeatedly by different candidates, men and women, the situation of human rights in this hemisphere is a delicate matter, certainly. Why, above and beyond structural issues, we could go on and on. There are new challenges that have arisen. For instance, new migratory flows, different themes that have come up, climate issues that are a big issue, and digital issues, not least. And so, as we take a look at this entire panorama, in trying to be a little more explicit, perhaps, along with other colleagues, there is, I think, a cultural crisis that stems from different criticisms, different unease, levels of unease that have come up in terms of public hearings in regard to the use of funds, in the use of means of communication. Sometimes countries are given a very brief deadline to answer. I'm talking about the Commission here vis-a-vis the membership. And sometimes these things can be perfectly legitimate. In other instances, frankly, this could be a perception. I'm not saying it's 100%, but, there can be different views of different parliaments. This is a varied continent, and the parliaments are very different, and the results of elections and perceptions thereof can also vary. Let's admit that coming in. But with regard to this crisis of what I would call legitimacy, or a presumed or potential crisis of legitimacy, there is, I would go on to say, a question of hegemony. What do I mean by that? Well, different projects for human rights have emerged, and they all have their claim to their day in the sun, but very often they are, guess what, in conflict one or the other. You can't maybe do it all. I think, when some people think, well, you're going to have to make hard choices, that I believe this hemisphere in the Americas and in the Caribbean, which is the whole hemisphere, we need to begin by recognizing that there are different viewpoints with regard to HR. Some are more liberal, coming very much from the country we're sitting in now. Others are more of a social approach in everything that a term would apply. Maybe not so much a material approach, but very much to do with many countries, with the cultural heritage that we have in our area. And you won't be surprised to say that the next thing out of my mouth is going to talk about the colonial heritage that we have with us, however we may manage it. But this we do also recognize is a wealth. This isn't something that we must bemoan or deal with in a negative way. We must work with it and recognize that it gives us a particular sense of the wealth and breadth of the issues we have before us. Now, when crises arise or particular issues, how do we deal with them? Well, clearly, we have to be constructive. We have to be not ideological. And I don't just mean as the commissioners ourselves or themselves, but in terms of the countries, of the members of this organization, and in terms, at the bottom of the day, of the choices we make. Because when all is said and done, it's how we choose. Is that not right? That says a very great deal. And so, are we going to be more constructive? Are we going to try to disperse those crises, very much there or emerging? Or are we going to take a different tack and very much try to avoid, at the very least, from making them worse? Because the victims of human rights abuses, the last thing they need is to have some kind of diminished defense because of a particular attack that was not the right one to take. So these are all problematic issues. The matter is certainly not simple. It is a challenge, let's face it. But let me just close by thanking particularly President Lula, but the whole of the Brazilian society and government for standing by me with regard to this candidacy. And this was again reiterated when the invitation to speak to you today was made. You may be sure that any national or policy, but indeed also regional issue that involves Brazil will, and even if Brazil isn't directly involved, will involve our support. We need to know how to work, even, and dare I say, especially in hard times, and always look for a common understanding. That's the bottom line. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir, says the chair. I give the floor to Rosa Maria Paya Acevedo for a maximum of 10 minutes from the United States. Madam, go right ahead. Thank you very much.
Distinguished ambassadors, esteemed members of the Permanent Council, fellow candidates, and representatives of the civil society. Buenos dias, bon dia, bonjour. Good morning. It is a profound honor to appear before you today as the nominee of the United States to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. I came to this candidacy not from government, political leanings, or ideology, but from deeply personal experience within the Inter-American human rights system. My journey into the world of human rights began in tragedy, when 13 years ago, on a hot Sunday afternoon in July, my mother and I learned that my father had gone missing. Hours later, we were told that he and my best friend were dead. In that moment, we knew that the many death threats they had received for defending human rights had finally come true. I had been volunteering in their work for some time, but the murder of my father, Osvaldo Paya, for defending democratic ideals in Cuba, transformed that effort into a lifelong mission, one that has continued through years of civil engagement, coalition building, and advocacy across the Americas. Many of you are already familiar with my background, so I won't go into details. What I will say is that my commitment to justice and democracy has guided my work across the Americas. I have stood before this commission not as a candidate, but as a petitioner. I know what it means to turn to the commission in moments of urgency, and I know the impact it can have when it responds. I led a regional network currently active in 20 countries, established a repression monitoring center, contributed to both countries' anti-thematic reports, secured precautionary measures for 12 human rights defenders, and participated in 9 public hearings before this commission. My advocacy has also reached the US Congress, National Congress in Latin America, the European Parliament, the United Nations, always with one goal: to defend democracy and protect those most at risk. If elected, I would bring to the role 3 core priorities rooted in both my experience and the urgent need of our hemisphere today. First, protecting the most vulnerable and upholding democratic values. Across our region, we face shrinking civic space and growing attacks on fundamental freedoms. At the same time, structural violence and insecurity affect many areas. Several threats across the region affect the very right to life we have the duty to protect for all human beings in the Americas. The Commission must respond with independence, clarity, and a victim-centered approach, standing firmly with those most at risk of harm or violence. In this context, I believe the Commission must protect political prisoners, human rights defenders, and groups and populations persistently discriminated or in situations of vulnerability. I also support a proactive approach to strengthening democratic institutions as outlined in the 2023-2027 strategic plan. At the same time, I will promote effective strategies to help states respond to violence from non-state actors. The Commission's legitimacy depends on standing with victims and acting in time before silence and fear take root. Second, ensuring a responsive, transparent, and effective Commission. Justice must be principled, but also timely, transparent, and practical. The system credibility is weakened when petitions remain unresolved for years. I support improving the Commission's effectiveness through an early triage of commissioners, prompt engagement with parties to seek friendly settlements, and focused working group meetings to resolve disputes. Strengthening transparency and accountability, both in the use of funds and in case management, while taking all necessary precautions to protect victims, is essential. Accountable cooperation agreements, as well as clear selection criteria and expected outcomes, will enhance trust and legitimacy. Addressing the procedural backlog requires not only more resources, but also optimization and innovation. The length and structure of case reports could be adjusted, drawing from the methodologies used by other human rights bodies. The Commission can adopt digital and responsibly explore AI to streamline processes and improve outcomes. Third priority, universalizing the system and expanding its reach. The Inter-American system belongs to all human beings in the Americas, yet its presence and accessibility remain uneven. If elected, I will work to strengthen the Commission's reach in underrepresented countries and regions, especially in the English-speaking Caribbean, to ensure the system reflects the linguistic, cultural, and legal diversity of the Americas. Expanding access also means developing more inclusive, predictable, and participatory mechanisms, especially for youth, women, and peoples in situations of vulnerability. To increase its impact, the Commission must be mindful of the interpretations of different national legal frameworks and strengthen and systematize its dialogue with member states, better fulfilling its advisory role to the organization. I will also deepen communication with civil society and public institutions across the hemisphere. I will work to ensure that all OAS member states, regardless of size or political color, can engage with the Commission in a respectful, meaningful, and transparent way. Universalization means more than treaty ratification. It means ensuring the system is relevant, responsive, and present wherever human rights are at stake. This relationship is essential to respond to major human rights crises facing the region, such as the devastating crisis in Haiti, which demands our deepest solidarity. It not only affects Haitians, but destabilizes the entire region. A coordinated regional response is therefore essential. The Commission must systematically engage with the OAS Permanent Council to ensure that Haiti remains a priority. These three core priorities are without prejudice to the full range of areas and interdependent rights safeguarded by the instruments that form the Commission's mandate. Colleagues, I come to this Commission as someone who believes in the promise because I have relied on its protection. I view myself as a change agent and as a bridge needed in a time where our region is polarized, but remains intent on rising to the task of becoming a stronger, safer environment for all. My commitment to the protection and promotion of human rights and democracy is unwavering. And so, my promise is this: I will serve independently, rooted in the belief that every person, without distinctions as to race, sex, language, creed, or any other factor, is entitled to dignity, security, and justice. I will serve as the bridge necessary to achieving justice and reprieve for victims. I commit to working alongside my fellow commissioners to maximize efficiency, bring innovation to our work, and deliver results for all the people in the Americas. Let me close with the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, whose vision helped inspire the American Declaration of Human Rights, drafted just months after our own American Declaration. Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity, without discrimination. That is the promise I believe in. That is the mission I would carry. And that is the service I.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now we will give a warm welcome and a microphone for 10 minutes to Carlos Bernal Pulido from Peru. I give you the floor. Your Excellencies, ambassadors, members of the OAS, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin by thanking Colombia, my country, for having renominated me in 2020 for the high-level position that I now hold. And I would also like to thank the Peruvian state, which I have been honored to represent as nomination as someone who is not a son of that land. And to me, it is a huge honor, as noted by Thomas Bergenthal of the United States, or the representative of Trinidad and Tobago, as representatives of Costa Rica and St. Kitts and Nevis. You, in your wisdom, have asked to accept this possibility with the relevant criteria, not as nationality, but contribution from each person that they can make to the IACHR. Today I am presenting myself to all of you in a different position to that in which I joined this forum 4 years ago. From January 2022, I have been working as commissioner at the IACHR, and that is why this intervention has two objectives. On one hand, to speak about the exercise of the mandate that I was granted, and also ask that with your vote, the member states of the OAS not only renew this mandate, but that you support me to continue guiding a transformation from the Commission toward best practices. Since 2022, I have sought to work diligently and independently, and 4 principles have guided my work. First of all, exhaustive review of all issues submitted for my information. Second, to be objective and neutral from an ideological perspective. Thirdly, demanding that statements from the Commission are based on sources from the Inter-American legal system and human rights law, as well as evidence. Finally, allowing the states to decide democratically on issues related to human rights that generate domestic debate, because it's not appropriate for the Commission to be a tool used by certain ideological groups that attempt to obtain in this form what they cannot at the polling place. This has led to some results. Some are the first report on the rights of persons with disability published just yesterday by the Commission, which was carried out under my guidance and leadership, or the report on the state of exception in El Salvador, the recommendations of which have already been implemented in large part by that state with the aim of improving standards for human rights protections. My independence of criteria and my willingness to note discrepancy in legal errors or anything else that is relevant has led to debate at times, including with some colleague commissioners from the Executive Secretariat of the Commission and some civil society organizations. This debate is welcome, as that dynamic debate is what leads us to justice and improves the work of the Commission. That is why, since arriving, I have worked to ensure that the majority of the Commission is willing to act detached from the conventional standards of the Inter-American human rights system, and often without evidence. In this, I have been very clear that the international responsibility of states is not based on simply conjecture. As part of this, I have not been alone. Many other commissioners, Eduardo Ralón and Gloria Dimes, have understood the scope of these challenges, and we have often agreed with one another, and often this has been rejected by the majority of the Commission. Commissioner Ralón, as well as I, have been discriminated against due to our independence and for taking seriously the sources of the Inter-American human rights system, and that is why neither of us have been chairs of the Commission when it was our turn based on custom of seniority. And so we ask, members of this organization have often expressed protest to this before the Commission, and there are questions which 3 years after beginning my mandate, I continue to ask myself without getting a clear response. Why doesn't the Commission still have a transparent digital system that shows the current status of each case for any interested party? The Constitutional Court of Colombia, where I was a judge, has a similar system, and this led to over 1,000 cases a year, and the creation cost less than $100,000. Why do we have some cases that evolve with a dizzying speed at the cost of others that languish, although they came first in order of priority? Why do some states grant so little time to responding to draft press releases or statements through digital platforms? And worse still, why do some member states express these observations? And why do commissioners not have direct permanent access to files from the case system but the decisions are based on a report prepared by the Executive Secretariat, which often has a narrative incompatible with the evidence submitted as part of the proceedings. As you can all see, my commitment to the inter-American human rights system has been a hurdle to my appearing at today's meeting without sharing the real challenges faced by the Commission. And now we are facing a situation like this, and I suggest that member states of the OAS, as the rectors of the system, give impetus to an internal transformation of the Commission, which may be the result of electing commissioners to be held in Antigua and Barbuda at the end of June. If, with your vote, those who speak and the other commissioners that are elected have the opportunity to build a new majority in the Commission, it will be possible for us to truly transform this institution. In that sense, the Commission that I imagine is transparent. It does not vary in the rigor of its application of standards between countries based on the ideology of whatever government is in charge. Imagine a commission that accuses less and dialogues more, a commission that takes seriously the different cultural aspects in our region and is aware of the different standards of human rights law development when implementing those standards. Imagine a commission that's less arrogant with states, that is more willing to learn from all stakeholders, states, victims, and civil society, which places more emphasis on reconciliation than on content. I imagine a commission guided not only by the Executive Secretariat, but rather by the members that the states have decided to place at its helm. I imagine a commission that works not to hide different points of view, and I imagine a commission that respects the democracy of each people and recognizes that, in principle, these are the peoples of the Americas who are responsible for deciding with their vote what path they shall take. I imagine a commission that is capable of coming up with serious proposals for the most pressing human rights challenges: poverty, exclusion of the most vulnerable, massive migration, arbitrariness, a lack of institutionality in a country as important as Haiti, and climate change. To summarize, I imagine a commission that is able to lead with example, that acts with transparency, with attachment to these standards, and works to ensure justice in a timely fashion, that implements these standards based on evidence and leaves activism in the hands of political parties and social movements in each nation. I imagine a commission that, rather than crushing democracy, catalyzes it. At this crossroads, I urge you to support a transformation of the Commission, a transformation that I am committed to leading if I am reelected. If your decision is to renew my mandate, then I will hold my head high before you, my God, my two daughters, and all of you, after having dedicated myself entirely to seeking justice in the Americas. It is that same dedication that you can expect from me if you honor me with your support. The decision is in the very best hands, yours. Thank you very much.
Agradeço a todos.
Thank you to all of the candidates for your presentations. And now we will move on to the questions and comments from member states. And so in order to ensure that we're respectful and efficient, I would like to ask that you ask your questions generally, directed to all of the candidates and not any specific candidates. I would like to invite the delegations to please take the floor. And I give the floor to Argentina first. Argentina, please go ahead. Chair, thank you very much for convening today's meeting, and thank you very much to all of the candidates who have clearly demonstrated that you all have the skills and are up to the immense task that you aspire to. And that is why I feel very grateful to take part in today's meeting and see the very high level that you all display. But certainly, when one needs to make a decision, we make them based on different criteria, different variables. And I, perhaps, though it was already mentioned by some of the candidates, don't want to avoid something when there's an elephant in the room that nobody wants to bring up. And the elephant that I think we all see, and sometimes it's difficult to talk about, is that there is a perception that the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights is losing prestige because there is a sensation, it might not be the reality, but this is a perception, and there are many that share this, that there is a challenge to maintaining a technical, neutral, independent role. And when I'm talking about independence, I'm not just talking about the independence of the states. I'm talking about the independence that corresponds to its relationship with different civil society organizations. When we debate the issue of those of us who have always professed a commitment to democracy, civil society is very important. But civil society is not represented by a single NGO. It involves a wide range of organizations which often have very different views. And therefore, the great dilemma is, how can we also be independent from the NGOs themselves, which often are far more active than others when it comes to their influence on the narratives and visions within the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights? That's my first comment. And my question for my colleagues, once again, I'd like to also thank you for your presentation, is related to an issue that I think we might see, or how you all think about it and how we would manage it. It's something that's very controversial, and that's the issue of religious freedom. This is an issue that has been very controversial because many members understand that the Commission went beyond its mandate than the Assembly wished it to based on its own report. Without getting into debate on the issue, I would like to use this issue to demonstrate that it's indispensable that those who work for the Commission understand that the mandates are sacred. We need a lot of dialogue to avoid creating issues like this. And with that, I'll conclude, Chair. Thank you very much. I come from a country where the IACHR had not existed during the latest military dictatorship. We would not have been able to address the forced disappearance of persons and so many systematic human rights violations that took place. I am not from a country that is not committed to democracy. I come from a country that has built democracy over 40 years uninterrupted. And from there, I am asking this question and making these comments. Thank you very much, Chair.
Passo a palavra à delegação da Bolívia, embaixador.
Bolivia, please. Thank you, Chair. The plurinational state of Bolivia has placed great value on this special session of the Permanent Council to hear the presentations from all of the candidates for the IACHR for the 3 spots that will be chosen at the upcoming session of the GA to be held in June. Thank you very much for the presentations made by all of the candidates, and my delegation believes it's vital for us to hold this dialogue in order to get to know better those who will shoulder the immense responsibility of promoting observance and defense of human rights in our region, pursuant to Article 41 of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, San Jose of Costa Rica agreement. And it's important for us to understand their specialized knowledge and experience in this area, and above all, their objectiveness and impartiality when it comes to defending human rights in such an important body, which often is described as the jewel in the crown, something that Bolivia would like to ratify. And in the 8th article of the Convention on Human Rights, each member of the Commission may not carry out activities that impact their impartiality, independence, or the dignity and prestige of their position in the Commission. We would like to, therefore, better know their experience in defending human rights, and the plurinational state of Bolivia has, therefore, drafted the following respectful general questions to all of the distinguished candidates. First of all, do you consider that there is a risk in the progressive degradation of human rights, and considering the fight of many different indicators in this area of groups that have traditionally been excluded and marginalized, such as women, indigenous populations, and LGBTQ plus persons? And based on that, can you please identify those risks? Second, given the responsibility of the work of the Commission and the growing processes in cases and the major procedural backlog right now, what is your opinion on how to work from the Commission to ensure that it works continually with commissioners and not just in periodic sessions? Third, given the advancements of human rights and an important economic redistribution in our countries as a fundamental tenet of institutionality and democracy, as well as democratic institutions that are sustainable and strengthened, how do you plan on promoting economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights contained in the San Salvador Protocol, which are part of the Inter-American human rights system? Fourth, what is your opinion on the best way to promote human rights for gender equality, the rights of women and girls in all of their diversity, as well as sexual and reproductive rights? Fifth, how do you view the relationship between the ICHR with civil society, given the apolitical nature that must reign in the noble work of protecting protecting human rights? And a sixth question, I apologize, Chair, for all of the questions, but this is a very important decision we must be making. What is your criteria for the collegial vision of the Commission, and what would be its relationship to the loss of this vision for the work of the Commission? In other words, what is your vision of the loss that we are bearing witness to over the last several months recently in this collegial view of the work of the Commission, and how would this impact the legitimacy with which the Commission needs for its supreme role as a defender of human rights? Thank you very much. Chile. Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for presenting all of the candidates. We place great value on that, and I will try to be brief in my question. The court has many advisory opinions pending on issues that have been considered important by the region, and that includes an approach on human rights, on the climate emergency, the right to care, the activity of private companies that use weapons, and protecting democracy. And above all these issues, the Commission has made statements or will make statements on issues before the court. What content agenda do you see as pertinent for highlighting in the immediate and future and the midterm? Thank you very much. Costa Rica. Thank you very much, Chair, distinguished delegates, candidates. My delegation would like to thank you for convening today's very important session. And certainly this is a show of the collective commitment that we all have as states with strengthening the inter-American human rights system. I would also like to highlight that all of the profiles presented that we heard today come from an extremely high level. All of them are worthy of joining the Commission, and these proposals today that we have heard reflect also very careful selection by the states, and they have placed great value not only on professional academic merits of the candidates, but also the fundamental criteria that we have discussed so many times here in this forum, such as geographic balance, gender parity, the diversity of legal trajectories, and professional experience for each and every one of you. From our delegation, we would like to ask some general questions with the aim of contributing to a transparent and enriching selection process for the future of the Commission and the high level of responsibility that we all shoulder for the upcoming election. 1. How can the candidates, if you are elected, strengthen the quality and the timeliness of state responses in monitoring processes in line with the multi-level dialogue that's been promoted by the IACHR in its strategic plan for 2023-2027? 2. When it comes to the structural challenge of the procedural backlog and aware of the progress made in the automated administrative system Gaia, what specific measures do you propose for accelerating the handling of petitions and cases without sacrificing due process or legal certainty? 3. Given the complex financial backdrop that the Commission faces, what innovative strategies do you believe would be viable for ensuring the sustainability of the IACHR without compromising its independence? And finally, I have a question that is a priority for us. What concrete proposals will you drive to optimize the procedure for receiving petitions and requests for precautionary measures so that a filter may be implemented to prioritize the efficient use of time and resources from the very beginning? How will you ensure that from this initial stage, we are able to contribute to preventing backlogs and delays to prevent a weakening of the user's trust in the system? Costa Rica will continue to advocate for a robust, efficient, independent commission that is close to the reality of the Americas. Thank you very much to all of the candidates for your openness to dialogue with us and for your commitment to human rights. Thank you very much.
Passo a palavra à delegação da Guatemala.
Guatemala is recognized. Thank you, Chair. My delegation is very pleased that this special session of the Permanent Council has been convened, and it gives us, as we see, an important opportunity to speak to candidates to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights for the coming period. The mission and the work plan of each one of the candidates is important for us to understand as they seek to become part of this critical part of human rights. The IACHR is the premier guardian of human rights in the Americas. That's why we need people who are technical experts, people who are objective, and perhaps above all, people who have a strong grip and sense of the realities of this region. That is why, in this exchange, Guatemala would like to put the following questions. First, with regard to the cut in personnel because of budget reasons, and considering that the special rapporteurships are not part of the regular fund of the OAS, here's the question. Should we not consider a way to afford these rapporteurships better stability so that they stop having to depend on donations? Second, what possible measures might we take so that steps can and which should be taken to ensure that the human rights in the hemisphere don't keep slipping behind rather than moving forward? This we say with the greatest respect and best hopes for the IACHR. Thank you very much. The ambassador from Mexico, Lucelina Baños, has the floor. Thank you, Chair. Mexico takes this opportunity to applaud this excellent exercise in democracy, and we welcome the candidates of the future Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Mexico considers it to be an absolutely essential part of the Inter-American system writ large, and we here applaud your work and indeed your commitment on an everyday basis. I'd like to greet the Executive Secretary of the ICHR, Tanya Renaud, and her excellent team. Thank you for everything you do for each individual in the region. Let me also express our recognition and our thanks to the candidates that are coming forward here before the Permanent Council to share with us how they see the IACHR, what they hope to contribute to it. And so that we can indeed understand those hopes and those visions more clearly, let me ask the following briefly. First, what do you think are the principal challenges so that the independence, partiality, and autonomy of the Commission can be maintained? And most especially, what importance do you give to the collegiality among those who participate in this organ? Second, how do you see the follow-up on the decisions taken so that there is an integral reparation to victims? Third, how would you incorporate into your own work a more cross-cutting approach for the rights of women to ensure that they too are offered the opportunity to live a life free of discrimination and ongoing hostility? And with regard to the LGBTIQ plus community, what do you think the proper rapporteurship should be for that particular thematic rapporteurship of the ICHR? Thank you. Thank you, says the chair. Colombia is recognized. Mr. Chairman, a very good morning to you and indeed to all. And above all, thank you for inviting us to join you this morning and giving us a chance to get to know these candidates. It is hugely important, I think, that we do so. This is an important, indeed, a signal moment in which we can make a difference by choosing candidates who may be, in fact, prompted to join if they're invited to do so, and also give a reason to those who are already there to decide to stay. Here's a question. How do you think candidates should work with each other? Most especially, to drill down, what specific proposals might you suggest so that the IACHR can more effectively broach and face the challenges that come to us from artificial intelligence, massive hate speech, mass information and hate speech that we know are such serious and damaging sources of erosion to democracy, especially in the area of freedom of expression and democracy itself, capital D. Secondly, with regard to the bodies of the Inter-American system, let me say, the Inter-American Court has stated that unilateral or indeed multilateral sanctions that may restrict access to essential rights like health, food, personal dignity, life itself, may be incompatible with international law. Some people are saying that, and they say that they are per se violations of human rights. Well, what do you have to say about that? Thank you. Thank you, says the chair. El Salvador is recognized. Thank you, Chair. We too certainly applaud the candidates for their presentations and thank them for being here and having the interest that they manifestly have in the Commission and in human rights in general. In general, we have been able to exchange views with the candidates with regard to concerns of my own country, which, no surprise, echo the concerns of many other states. So let us all recognize that is the view of El Salvador. This round may well be a very fine chance to ensure that the next composition of the IACHR is a good reflection of what really moves us and our specific concerns, specifically with regard to fulfilling commitments acquired, both with regard to the universal system and the IACHR system. I would ask the following, which are general in nature. Here we go. What changes would you suggest that the Commission consider to use the scarce resources available, particularly those that come from mandates and those that countries are very much insisting be taken as quickly as possible, especially with regard to precautionary measures? Next, what criteria might you suggest in terms of making sure that the parameters on which this commission operates are clearer if necessary. And what measures might the states do to make them even clearer? Next, with regard to requests for information, how might you lessen the load that that set of requests always means for the states? Thank you very much. Uruguay is recognized. Thank you. I would like to say a few words before I go into depth to the issue we have before us. Uruguay greatly regrets the death of Jose Mujica at 89 years, died yesterday. He was president of our country between 2010 and 2015. And let me tell you, he was not only a very great political leader for Uruguay, but his form of life, the way he lived and his position was highly regarded. He has shaped, and I think will mark for a very long time, not only the present generations, but those to come. We're talking about equal law. We're talking about the regulation, the ability to have an abortion, and numbers of other changes that really marked a difference for my country. He sought very much to ensure that his ideals had a chance of winning, and he never gave up. That's why he kept trying when he wasn't elected the first time. He never gave up. He kept trying. And that determination, I think, will be an inspiration to us all. Pepe will be missed. Let me go on to say that with regard to this very constructive dialogue that the member states are having, for which we're grateful, with candidates for the next group of the IACHR, I'd like to talk about Special Rapporteur Schütz, the vision of the candidates on the role of women, particularly in terms of her reproductive rights, and a couple of more as I go along. In terms of working conditions, many have talked about artificial intelligence as a means by which the effectivity or the benefits that the Commission may offer may improve. What do you think? The next question has to do with boys, girls, and adolescents. How can we continue protecting their human rights? Thank you very much. Thank you. Canada is recognized.
I would like to express on behalf of my delegation our deepest condolences to the state of Uruguay for their loss to begin with. Monsieur le Président, au nom du Canada.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of Canada, let me sincerely thank each of the candidates for being here and for putting themselves forward as potential commissioners for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Canada rejoices in the number of people that have come forward, ready to take up the challenges, because they exist, and we know that the IACHR for us is a cornerstone of the fight for human rights from north to south throughout the region. That is why we think it is so important to make sure that the Commission continues to be able to work with regard to sustaining democratic institutions and to allow us to Moscow. And you may be very certain that Canada remains 100% behind this vital institution, which goes to the Secretariat of the Commission, and its ability to protect the lives of humans in the Americas.
A political organization that should not be used as a tool of pressure or influence to deviate it from its core mandate to protect the human rights and dignity of all. With that, a lot of the questions have already been posed, Mr. Chair, so I will simply pose this one. What is your assessment of the state of human rights in the hemisphere? What do you see the most pressing human rights challenges in the Americas, especially in the light of the so-called anti-rights movement in the region? Thank you.
Passo a palavra à delegação do
Thank you. Peru is recognized. Chair, I have two questions for the candidates of the IACHR. Here we go. One, the European Human Rights Tribunal has coined the sense of margin of appreciation. What does that mean? It means the area in which not a single point of view should bear particular weight, but rather one that is considered amongst a group of such considerations by the countries considering them. Fine. However, let's be clear, that margin of appreciation, margen de apreciación, is not, in fact, very popular, let us say, in this hemisphere. So what do you all think? What should be considered in such a context here in the Americas? Question two, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights do you think, has different scopes in the OAS? I think the answer is yes. For those who are subscribers to the San Jose Pact, it acts as the public ministry, as a means by which accusations can be brought before the Inter-American Court. But for those who are not signatories, it serves as defense of the people, where recommendations are made, but which are not binding. Now, that is a significant difference. And here's my question. Do you think that difference generates a double standard? Thank you. Thank you. Haiti is recognized, Ambassador.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you so much, Chair. The Republic of Haiti is very grateful to the chair of the Permanent Council for calling this meeting, this special meeting, for us to be able to consider the potential candidates to the next generation, let us put it that way, of the Inter-American Commission. Greetings to you, Maria Clara Galvez Catiño of Colombia, José Luis Caballero of Mexico, Reina Rivera Otoya of Honduras, Marian Betel of Bahamas, Fabio Frada de Silva of Brazil, Maria Rosa Acevedo of the United States, and Carlos Bernal Pulido of Peru. We take very close note of the candidacies before us. Their backgrounds are very impressive, their expertise, and the engagement that each one of the candidates has shown, frankly, makes this a pretty tough choice. Now, it is the fact that the ICHR is a fundamental pillar, we believe, of the whole Inter-American system. We're talking about human rights that are ever more under attack, where political violence goes from bad to worse, and where the most vulnerable are ever more bereft of sufficient protection. That is why, in terms of this very grave humanitarian situation, and the ongoing attacks on human rights that we have in Haiti by armed gangs are particularly nefarious for women, for children, and make for an absolutely essential response on our part. The vigilance of the ICHR, let me tell you, in our judgment, is ever more important. Not less so, not equally, but ever more important. We need to make sure that the Human Rights Commission is buttressed, because the atrocity of ill treatment, of abuse, of ongoing violations against Haitian migrants by a number of countries in the region has to be noted. It's important that very often when people seeking asylum are coming forward, the migrants are not sufficiently considered. It is therefore imperative, we believe, that the member states of this council find a better way to entrust that our approach toward asylum is very much more effective than it is today. This election, therefore, is particularly dear to us and critical to us. We need to make sure that the candidates have very solid legal credentials, but also a sensibility to the real needs of this region, most especially to those who are most vulnerable. And that's what we're going to be looking for. We want an open dialogue with the member countries so that we can indeed express our respective views. But let me say again as I closed, Haiti is deeply grateful to the statements by each of you, and we hope that you stand ready with us to work hand in hand within the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. These are the fundamental freedoms of the region that are in question. Thank you very much. The U.S. is recognized.
Express our deep appreciation to the 7 candidates for your willingness to serve and for your participation here today at this event, which affirms our shared commitment to transparency and accountability so that member states can choose those candidates who are best positioned to advance the Commission's core mandate. The United States has long supported the Commission as an institution for defending human rights and democratic principles in the hemisphere, while at the same time we reaffirm our support for tangible reforms that can help the Commission work more efficiently, enhance transparency, and ensure the clarity and consistency of its outputs. We believe that effective commissioners are those who have expertise in international human rights law, but also independence of judgment, regional credibility, and a demonstrated ability to engage respectfully across various legal traditions. In particular, we recognize the value of candidates whose perspectives are shaped not just by professional or academic experience, but also by experience in contexts of democratic fragility or rights denial. That perspective brings important insight to the Commission's work and reinforces its connection to human rights struggles. Chair, we welcome the Commission's ongoing implementation of its 2023 to 2027 strategic plan, and this leads to my three questions. First, as the Commission approaches the midpoint of its implementation of the plan, what areas do the candidates view as the most effective to date, and what priorities or innovations would they recommend for the next plan? Two, how can the Commission better harness technology, data, and external partnerships to manage its growing caseload and reduce the case backlog? And three, how might the Commission deepen its engagement with common law member states, particularly in the Caribbean, and work in partnership with universities, legal institutions, and the Inter-American Court to ensure timely access to and timely response by the system? Thank you.
Passo a palavra à delegação do Brasil.
Brazil is recognized. Thank you very much, Chair. Before any further consideration, let me say how much the Brazilian delegation appreciates the opportunity to meet with the candidates of the IACHR today. Brazil greatly values this opportunity to exchange views, to have a sense of what their sense is of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and why they're interested in the work and what is the raison d'etre of that commission. So here we go. I have two questions for each. What are the proposals of these candidates to strengthen the dialogue of the IACHR with the states? That's one. Two, how do the candidates see the use of social networks with regard to the IACHR? Thank you. Thank you, the Chancellor for Honduras, Eduardo Torres, Vice Chancellor of Honduras has the floor. Eduardo Torres, thank you very much indeed. We are pleased to join you today. Thank you, candidates, for stepping forward. And indeed, thanks to each of the Commission members for being here to put our heads together. We're grateful for your interest. We're grateful for everything you may suggest that may make this a stronger body. Much has been said from the administrative standpoint. I'm not going to go into that. Because all of the questions that other countries have put are pertinent. I would merely like to offer a point of view, an observation, if you wish. At this stage of the game, much of the greatest challenges that Honduras is facing within the IACHR and before the court, let me say, were voiced by a population that you may describe in any number of ways, citizens in general, or newspaper people, or members who are supporters of the HR, or members of the government, because at one point we were in the opposition. But guess what? We're now the government. So the ball is in our court, as it were. And from that standpoint, and with that background, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask the candidates the following. What do you think is needed to make sure that people will again have trust? I mean, trust in the population. What do you think we can do to make sure that our people can look to the IACHR and think, yeah, they're going to fight for us. Yeah, they're a good body. What do you think? What will make the difference, do you think? What lessons learned, maybe, do you think, have we missed or need to have more present? That's point one. Two, what do you think should be the position vis-a-vis the government with regard, again, to decisions that are before us? Because the reason why we governments have to now answer what we used to be asking as citizens is because we have to wait more than 5 years and a minimum of 5 to get an answer. So what do you think? What can we do to make sure that answers don't take that long in coming? And finally, if I may, and this may certainly echo what others have said, but bear with me, on which parameters are we going to base our decisions from a legal standpoint? Here's a question. are we ready to backtrack with regard to agreements that have already been made? Do we have 100% buy-in by everybody to hang in there with the rules of the game? Or are we going to stick to international law in the strictest sense and make sure that we can turn either a deaf ear to very loud voices or in turn listen and hear the people, quite aside from their nationality or condition or political views? This is the loaded set of questions that we have for you, and hope that together, basically, we can answer how can we garner people's trust. That's what it comes down to. And how can we possibly ensure that decisions by the ICHR don't take forever to come down the pike? It needs to come faster for the sake of the human rights. Thank you. Thank you very much. Grenada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My delegation thanks you for the convening this session and the opportunity to interact with the candidates. We salute all of the candidates and congratulate the nominating countries for bringing such high quality of capacity to the ISCHR's candidacy. Of course, at this stage, many of the questions we had have already been posed, and so we will not repeat those. Mr. Chair, permit me just to ask two of the questions that I think, even though they've gone, I'd like to ask them from this perspective. First, there is a growing role of the civil society's participation in the system, and at times this tends to carry the views and the interests of mainly of organizations well-funded and well-prepared. The Commission and the system is, however, supposed to, by our convention, protect the rights of the most vulnerable, of the ordinary who may or may not be associated with such associations and with their governments. The question is, candidates, how would you advocate for the protection of those who are most marginalized, most vulnerable, most at risk, who are alienated from the formal structures, ensuring that their voices are heard and their rights are also upheld? And secondly, regarding climate justice and climate change, various international bodies and agreements, including the UN Human Rights Council and the Paris Agreement, they're increasingly acknowledging the link between climate change and human rights. What is your view, candidate, on this? And how do you see your role in your preparation as a candidate influencing the positive results for the people most vulnerable, most affected by climate change, being respected as also human rights and given their related protection? Thank you.
Passo a palavra ao delegado.
Jamaica is recognized.
Thank you very much, Chair, distinguished panel, and also to say welcome to Vice Minister of Honduras, whose seat is next to me at this time. My delegation aligns itself to the expressions of condolences on the passing of former President Jose Pepe Mujica of Uruguay. Secondly, I take this opportunity to express sincere appreciation for the presentations by all the very qualified candidates, which afford us the opportunity to have first-hand engagement and to provide further insight into their backgrounds, and also, most importantly, for them to present their vision of the ICHR if elected. It is also important to note that the ICHR should seek to strengthen its partnership with member states and to protect their fundamental rights of freedom. We look forward to seeing an even greater sensitization of the work of the ICHR so that member states are aware of the work and not just view the ICHR as a guardian or watchdog or an agency of scrutiny, but as an important partner. Jamaica is therefore committed to protecting human rights of its citizens and to working even closer with the ICHR, an integral partner. And therefore, we are grateful that the ICHR has presented its work plan, which gave greater focus on strengthening the partnership with the Caribbean. Having said that, my delegation has two questions. Bearing in mind the Inter-American Children Institute is a specialized agency of the ICHR, how does the ICHR intend to grant even greater focus on the rights of children? We hear a lot about the rights of women, and we are very much convinced that the ICHR and member states are committed to protecting the rights of women. However, we continue to see high rates of femicides in the hemisphere. How can the ICHR partner with member states to give greater focus and also to address these challenges of femicide? Thank you.
Passo a palavra à delegação da Dominica.
Dominica is recognized.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just need to quickly recognize you and the Assistant SG and the candidates and all members of the head table. And to thank the candidates for the very, I think, progressive presentations and the fact that we would have a tough choice because most of them, all of them are very qualified for the position. I wish to, however, state that at the current moment, Dominica has an issue with the Commission that points to a need for reform. I think I would say safely, as far as our government is concerned, that the profile and effectiveness of the Commission is at an all-time low. And we are actually counting on the new candidates to give some energy to that profile. Dominica is indeed a thriving democracy by any stretch of the imagination. And we do have a very proactive electoral system. In fact, most of the member states of the CARICOM region have systems that we are proud of in that we have instant transition of governments the morning after elections. Our new governments are unlike other systems. Elections in office. Recently, however, we had electoral reform program with legislation that was actually bipartisan, adopted by all of Parliament, and preceded by a very extensive consultative process, one which I think the OAS was part of. But for some reason, we ended up having the Commission itself writing and raising objections. And what we witnessed through that process, though, is that there's a terrible process of information gathering. There's a rather strange definition of civil society. There's little time for consultation. In our case, it was half a working day. Even if our evidence included documentation, there's a failure to accept evidence when it was given, and a sense that neither law or reasonableness was a factor in the statements of the Commission. My question, therefore, is what, in your view, is the role of the Commission in electoral reform in member states, and what measures would you propose that could balance the Commission's independence with its effectiveness? Thanks.
Passo a palavra à delegação do Panamá.
Panama is recognized. Thank you, Chair. I'm honored to speak to all of you today at this special session to get to know the perspectives and proposals of the candidates to the ICHR. Our hemisphere is facing complex challenges in human rights that require robust information, technical independence, and an unbreakable dedication to values and human rights. And this is a fundamental pillar of the OAS and ICHR, and we must continue to address emerging situations by promoting and protecting all human rights. That said, I would like to share briefly with all of you some questions for the candidates today. The first question is, in a regional context where we face growing threats to human rights, from forced migration to the impact of climate change, what do you believe should be the strategic priorities of the Commission for the upcoming period? And what specific actions would you propose to close current gaps in human rights protection for the most vulnerable populations? My second question is a little bit related to what some delegations have already stated, but what strategy would you propose to ensure the financial sustainability and institutional strengthening of the special rapporteurships that already exist? What would be your criteria for building new rapporteurships to effectively respond to regional needs without compromising the quality and impact of the Commission's work? Thank you very much. Thank you to the delegations for your questions and comments. We will now move on to the last item on the order of business, and I will give the floor to the candidates in the same order so that they may respond with their final comments. As I stated at the outset of the session, each candidate has 7 minutes for their intervention. Maria Clara Galvez Patiño, I give you the floor. I would like to thank you very much for your questions, which reflect the interest that OAS member states have in the election of the commissioners. One of the sets of questions was related to the persons under protection from the Commission: women, children, the most vulnerable populations, indigenous people, LGBT plus people. And there is a clause, I'm thinking about this, is something I'm thinking about. There's a very powerful clause in the Inter-American Convention, and that is the principle of non-discrimination of any person for any reason. This clause goes along with the principles that were built since 1993 from the universality of protection, interdependence, integrality, and progressive protection. This is related to a body from the Commission, and we need to identify what is the need of protection for this specific person and address that. And we need to do so using the existing legal instruments as well as interpretations that already exist. This then brings us to a next question, which you mentioned many times, which is the sources of law. As I mentioned, the Commission has an important role in ensuring that commitments shouldered by states are fulfilled. And this is something we sometimes say, where's the commitment? Where's the obligation? We have to find the obligation, and sometimes an obligation is enough. We have an absolute prohibition. We can't allow torture, for example, but sometimes we need to look at the sources of law, the custom, the legal precedent, or sometimes what they call the legal corpus. And I believe that in the majority of the topics, development from 65 years of the Commission and 45 years of the Court mean that we do have the rule of the law to resolve the case. But, of course, there might be something that exists. So what do? If the rules are there, then create the rule to resolve the situation, to resolve the decision deriving from the text for the legal precedents, so that the concrete rule should always derive from and be implemented. It should always stem from an obligation. That is very clear, and that is where we see that argumentative chain. This is also related to an issue that I am greatly interested in, and thank you to Peru for bringing this up. That is the margin of appreciation. I have an article there that I haven't yet finished writing, and it is called The Margin. I see that the Inter-American system has chosen another path, that is the control of conventionality, which means that the bodies that interpret the law, that is the Court and the Commission, have determined the content of the law. They say this law means this law means that. And from my perspective, that has been such a widespread effort that there's not much room for margin for the content and the scope of the laws there. Certainly, we do have some margin in how we implement something within a state, the recommendations or decisions. But in order to define the content and the scope of a law, we don't have a lot of margin. But you might say, okay, well, recently we had this debate, as Argentina already brought up, about the freedom of religion. And this is a debate on the scope of obligations and how to justify or how to reach the point of creating new obligations. And there's times where we might do that. But if we already have the principles in text in front of us, which give us an argument about why we don't need to create a new standard, but in order to do so, when we need to do so, there's a process that is gradual. We can do so gradually. That means identifying where the law is or where the part of the obligation that hasn't yet been developed lies, and based on the specific needs, start to dialogue and have a conversation on that, hold the debate so that the next step would be the creation of a right or law. Now, from the obligation, that would be the fruit of consensus, which I believe is the most important thing. That is where we get certain rights, sometimes the right to the truth that comes from these debates. And so this allows us to move on to the question on collegiality. I strongly believe that diversity and integration of any body is one of its greatest strengths. And I have worked in a committee where we had persons from Africa, Asia, Europe. This is a source of wealth that we cannot ignore. Certainly, there are many origins, alternatives. There's different training and perspective, and that wealth means that we are able to learn to translate that into our own voice from our body, and our voice needs to be nourished by that diversity. So with that, I could share you, for example, some of my experiences in the committee. We had a country from Asia. It wasn't a Latin American states, but there was a decision that the committee needed to make about where we were divided. We did not all share the same view, and apparently we could not reconcile our positions through endless dialogue. What do you think? What's your position? And I'd like to share with you that I had to chair that session. We were able to make a decision as a collegial body after having our conversation. So dialogue is the route through which any consensus will pass. We need to be very patient. And as a Colombian, I'm optimistic. Dialogue can always be achieved. We could do it in Colombia. We were able to end a 60-year conflict through conversations. So how can we put 7 people in the commission and 35 states from the OAS in areas when we're not talking about that level of complexity? I staunchly believe that dialogue is the tool to solve our problems by talking about them until we reach a permission. And thank you. Jose Luis Caballero Ochoa, I give you the floor. Thank you very much. I will take advantage of these 7 minutes to speak a bit about my experience at the Inter-American Commission throughout this time and what I have seen thanks to the assignation that they made and the proposal from the Mexican state and that new vote of confidence from that country. And I'd like to thank Mexico very much. And I thank you very much for your participation, for your questions. I will answer them now. The Commission is doing an enormous task here. We can see that. And I have borne witness to that. In maintaining its role as a technically neutral body, it is politically independent, but it does have a certain slant toward the human rights of all persons due to the reivindication of groups that have historically been disadvantaged, and that is to ensure that we do not have regression in the rights and standards that have been set as a bare minimum, as Jose Salakep stated, because in the face of human rights violations, which include standards in the comprehensive reparation, the Commission has a historic memory. It has a coherent legacy, which must continue, and that is where we need to work day in and day out. Believe me, this is not a hurdle to dialogue. We have carried out visits to the Caribbean. We have put forth enormous efforts for technical cooperation to provide support in contentious cases. We have given vigorous impetus to treaties in the Caribbean in the last 5 years. There we have the working plan. We have worked with a great focus on dialogue with states in order to ensure friendly resolution and agreements for fulfillment, and we have several different reports underway seeking investigation, guarantees of non-repetition, reparations, to ensure that we have reports on compliance. I was in Colombia this year and last year, and the possibility to hear the recognition of international responsibility and specific means and measures for reparation is the exact type of dialogue that the Commission needs to have with states. The dialogue on transition reports, the dialogue with the follow-up mechanisms. This is to support the states with these very innovative mechanisms, and we have dialogue with the commissioners. We have the concept notes. Last year, I said we had over 1,700 consultations, and we have the report, the information on all of them. I do not share that the Executive Secretariat has a specific agenda or that the Secretariat has captured the Commission. The Executive Secretariat, rather, has a team of professionals who have been working for years, committed to the structural development of rights with a content that needs to reevaluate the standards, and that's where we see all of the work that was carried out on the annual report for 2024 that was just published. And in an exercise of transparency in the use of resources, sometimes they are scanty resources, and we face major challenges when it comes to reducing personnel, a lack of hiring, uncertainty looming over how people will work on the team and who will be on that team, how to work with states. As I already stated, this is a challenge when it comes to seeking reparations, and with a methodology that is very rigorous. Very, very rigorous. What's more, the Commission dialogues, as there isn't an agenda with certain civil society organizations, but we do work with stakeholders and those who speak to the Commission, and we have done this in periods of human rights crises. Civil society has sought to revindicate its rights for decades now, and we extend that to other international bodies, multilateral courts, where we have very close relationships. We have dialogue with these states. We have dialogue with the commissioners. We have transparency. We have a lot of work. There's dialogue with the entire world of human rights. I believe that collegiality will be based just like the agreement in the region. It depends on this recognition of the historic memory of human rights, of the legacy that we all hold in our hands for a minimum level of human rights development in the region. If, yes, we find ourselves in a conjectural period, things are very delicate, we must maintain this human rights development. And that is where the Commission works day in and day out. This is what I have seen as a commissioner. Thank you very much. Candidate Reina Rivera Hoya, I give you the floor. Thank you to the different states that have shared their questions. This reflects the great commitment and interest and the fact that the states have placed their trust in the inter-American system and not an external actor, but rather this part of the declaration of the American states and also the OAS Charter, where these bodies are created. And so this commission is part of that body. And so your questions reflect that reality. On the other hand, The diversity of the questions is great, and I will attempt to group them together to answer them all. And I see there is a trend. There are concerns about the situation of historically vulnerable populations or historically excluded populations. And I see a lot of questions on women, children, LGBT plus communities, indigenous and Afro-descendant communities. And obviously, this is related to other questions that are related to structural issues in the states. And finally, vulnerability comes from somewhere. Vulnerability stems from historic structural issues in countries, impunity, corruption, militarization, very serious poverty situations, inequality in access to basic essential services and others. And so, in this last year, the Commission has seen a higher percentage of cases than in 2023, but here we see the cases of people living in vulnerable situations, and they continue to turn to the Inter-American Commission in the face of a lack of a response within their own states. This is an appeal to the Commission. We need to work to address these requests and cases presented by these people who are often living in very serious risks. That's why we have the precautionary measures, but we also see it as a call for the Commission to use this attribute of working preventively with states in order to resolve human rights situations before they begin and in cases that reach the Inter-American Commission. Therefore, the Commission needs to work along these different paths and resolve cases that are presented in creating international standards to strengthen what my colleagues have already described as the very heart of human rights for these populations, and to work progressively to ensure that they are implemented in the states. But we also have to work from a preventive perspective, dialogue with states, work on public policies and recommendations, international standards, and ensure that they are reflected. I have mentioned that, and I have an external advantage. Over the last 13 years, I've worked day-to-day not in the Inter-American system. I have been working every day in international cooperation in human rights, working with a variety of groups and populations throughout the country. I have traveled my country from end to end, working to create an emergency protection fund, which is now operational, has protected many people. And from that external advantage, if you will, from the Commission, I suggest that in order to address these structural issues, the Commission obviously has many different tools available to it, thematic reports, foundational reports, in-person visits, and other tools, but we need something more systematic in our work, and that is why I suggest that we have a special rapporteurship to address issues related to the promotion and prevention as well as observations. Observation implies working very closely with states and international organizations in order to ensure that these standards are implemented in national laws and public policies, and thus we will be able to move forward in fulfilling as well as moving toward universalization, whether or not the state has ratified the treaty being addressed. So I'd like to reiterate that I support the comments made by my colleagues earlier that are related to the issue of not moving backward in the area of rights that have been acquired. And I like this phrase, this room for maneuvering, the margin for maneuvering. I love that analysis. But what we need to do is support the state on how they can ensure that this is implemented. And I also heard another set of questions which talked about internal challenges at the Commission, particularly those related to financing, related to procedural backlog, related to trust even, related to a commission that dialogues through interculturality and even the working plan. I think that in its working plan and its new strategic objective in 44 working areas, the Commission has made efforts along these lines. But last year, in order to operate, the Commission required $22 million, of which it only received $10.7 million from the states. Means that the challenges of the Commission are also here in this very room. And so the states must strengthen their commitment to the inter-American system with the Commission and all of these systems that have been created. And this is the challenge for the states, to ensure that this is a reality for all of their inhabitants, that we are able to defend their rights and develop so that every inhabitant is able to develop personally and carry out their own plan in life. And this should be the focus of the OAS as well. So once again, I'd like to reiterate the importance of strengthening contributions from the states. And it's also important to thank you very much to you. And now Miriam Bethel is recognized.
Thank you very much. I too would like to thank the permanent representatives for presenting before us a plethora of concerns and about their relationship with the ICHR and the OAS system, and how they would want us to really take those concerns seriously and how we might think about addressing them. I would like to just start by drawing on my prior experience on the CDOC committee to say that when I first sat on the CDOC committee, I had been working as an activist in the NGO arena on women's rights, human rights, etc., in the Bahamas and the Caribbean region in particular. And so when I joined the committee, I really thought that I understood really well and knew fundamentally all of the procedures and international law and human rights framework. It was a rude awakening for me when I got there. So it took me, and I had to really scale up myself to really reach the level of my other colleagues and to be able to hit the ground running. So it was a steep learning curve, and I am humble enough to say that I can see that if I am elected as a commissioner, it will be a similar process. What I would say, though, is that I have a breadth of experience since when I first joined the CDOC committee, and would bring that breadth of experience in all of the ways that I have acquired it. And so it won't be, I won't be a complete novice, but I will have to learn a lot of, I think, the internal procedures and processes of the OAS and the ICHR. I've read the American Convention, I've read the OAS Charter, and I understand those. My legal skills and analysis, help me to navigate that. But I can say very much upfront that in terms of the actual standard operating procedures and the mechanisms of the OAS and the ICHR, I will really have to be able to be a part of the commission to understand better how to address and improve some of those mechanisms, etc. But I want to say from the outset, what I would bring to the committee is a real understanding and practice of independence and impartiality as an expert. That was one of the pillars on which we anchored our work on the CDOC committee. And so if there are any conflicts of interest that I may have as a commissioner, I would want to be the first to acknowledge that. In addition to that, there are my colleagues who have also the right to challenge me on conflicts of interest and independence and impartiality. So I take very seriously this issue of depoliticization of the commission and its work, and how it can negatively impact the states parties and their concerns. And so independence and impartiality, I think, is a hallmark of the work that I would like to bring to the commission. One of the other aspects that I highlighted in my introductory remarks is the issue of constructive dialogue. And all of my colleagues have really spoken to this issue of collaboration, constructive dialogue with states parties. And I cannot overestimate the significance of that. I saw it and I know it in practice for the 8 years that I spent on the CEDAW committee, that we, in spite of tensions and disagreements, et cetera, we really had those kinds of profound, in-depth conversations with states parties on their challenges of the advancement of rights for women and girls in particular, their constitutions, their issues around gender-based violence, statelessness. Those were the hard conversations that we had. And we met the states parties where they were, and we advanced our concerns with them. And it was through a really, I mean, our framework was called constructive dialogue. I mean, that is how we framed the work that we did. And so I would want to bring that same kind of constructive dialogue, collaboration, and to really engage with permanent representatives of the various countries in regard to the concerns and challenges and problems that we at the Commission will be working with. And so constructive dialogue. The issue of collegiality, I think, is crucial. It was a committee of 23 persons, and collegiality was absolutely essential to the work that we did, a building of trust. And so a part of what I would want to promote is that we really take some dedicated time. I know time is of the essence. I know we've got to deliver on human rights and critical concerns. People are dying, you know, people are lacking food security, et cetera. So people are in detention. Those are really difficult and timely issues that need to be addressed. At the same time, I do think that the ICHR and commissioners need to find some dedicated time and space to have what I would call the difficult conversations around the issues. And some of those issues that have been presented are issues around the rule of law, the weakening of democratic institutions, the shrinking of civic space. I think we need to really have those conversations so that we build the trust, we understand what each other thinks and how we think, which is a good thing, I think, and build on that. I mean, there won't be agreement all the time, for sure. But I think driving towards consensus is really important. I think at the end of the day, there ought to be room for voting if that is where things have to head because of time constraints in particular. But I think we ought to really make a commitment to a dedicated time and space to have the kinds of conversations that we need to build trust and the collegiality, and to really understand the issue around independence and impartiality. Yes. I want to look at this issue then of what I might call the interdependence of human rights, which I had spoken about in terms of economic, social, cultural rights, and civil and political rights being a part of everything that we do, and relate that in some way to the issue of climate crisis, which is the question was asked.
Obrigado, seu tempo.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid your time ran out. Fabio de Saint Silva is recognized. Thank you so much, Chair. I want to begin by...
Very insightful questions. Quisiera tener tiempo para...
The candidate is speaking in all of the official languages. I think he's saying thank you very much and for allowing me the opportunity to respond to your interesting questions, and I hope I do so satisfactorily. I want to focus on the different populations, women, children, adolescents, LGBTIQ+, LGBTIQ+, as well as the whole issue of democracy. These issues are clear from the round of debate we have held because because we do not have, I don't think, sufficient understanding and agreement in the OAS as to the degree to which human rights must yet be further protected in these populations that are structurally and historically looked down upon and discriminated against. It's for a variety of reasons that we are compelled to look at this again. But if there is any discordance here, I might say perhaps it is more as regards to the means by which HR are protected than the importance that is accorded to human rights itself. I said at the beginning of my statement that there are a great many different attitudes one can take with regard to human rights. But I would also add to that many different set of perspectives, the global and regional perspective. And, let me just say it, the role of such organizations as the place where we are now sitting and how we move forward from here. All of these matters are absolutely legitimate. Let me say it again. And the manner in which these issues are debated and will continue to be debated, not only in this council room, but within the Commission, will remain a matter that must be looked at in a constructive way from an ideological standpoint, one would hope, but I would say also from the standpoint of diplomacy on the part of the commissioners. Why do I say that? Why diplomatic? Well, let me tell you why. Because do you know something? The challenges that the commissioners themselves face aren't any different from the ones each one of you sitting around this table are facing. Just think of it for a minute, and you'll have to recognize that's the case. These are challenges, man. And if you don't see it, they won't see it, and we've all got to see it, is what I'm saying. So, yes, let's be enthusiastic. When we look, for instance, of the technologies, we think, oh, hallelujah, we've got the technology, AI, it's going to do the trick. Well, hello. That isn't any more certain than any other technology. Now, let me tell you, there are a great many technologies and instruments that could be used, and that may well have to be used, why not, in trying to help move these matters forward. When I was working at the Ministry of Justice, when I was looking at these issues, well, we came into the same room, brought into the same room, I should say, all kinds of professors who knew everything about that stuff. Well, guess what? Let me tell you, they had very different views with regard to education. They were focused on the detailed. They wanted to be sure that the security of the unit was going to be great because they saw people coming in and out. They saw ex-prisoners, and they were very nervous about that. And when they met with professors, they thought, oof, well, finally we're going to be able to sit down and take a breath and see how we can move forward and better understand the challenges, intellectual and professional, that we've all got before us, and that must be recognized and certainly surmounted for there to be a valuable support by people. Now, why do I talk about technological or socio-political seminars? Because we had 4 seminars in Brazil. Now, you may say, why 4? Well, not even just the 4. We had an additional one where all of these different, very disparate points of view were juggled like a pack of cards so that we could finally come up with a view that we all felt identified in. Well, I didn't say that. Well, yeah, no, let's see how much we said and how much we can say. Things like, this goes down to things like freedom of religion, you know, really touchy things that you need to broach if you're determined to broach them in a manner that has to be broad-minded. Finally, let me touch on the financial matter. I'm very sure that the Commission is, not may, is going to be required to do more with less. That's just how it is. Now, how will that happen? Well, let's all put our heads together. Efficiency, do more with less, etc. And no doubt a number of other important issues. But let me echo what a couple of people said that I think are good. We want to rehearse here and hold up the commitment of the Commission, of the states to the Commission, I should say. at one point, we went out and we tried to find, or it was suggested that we find financing from other sources. And I said, look out. Look out. What may look good to begin with may not be so good. Because if you start taking money from different interests and different groups of people, you understand, that is going to paint a different picture. And so that's why we're hard at it. And I want to thank you, to close, for your questions. Thank you for your commitment. Let's keep at it in bilateral groups, among ourselves, and multilateral here in this room, and on till the General Assembly of the OAS. Thank you very much. Thank you. Candidate Maria Paz Acevedo has the floor. Thank you so much for your various comments and observations. Well, absolutely. We are living in a democracy where democracy is dwindling, let's face it, where the rule of law isn't what it was, and where digital intelligence is ever more important. And very often, that technology seems to overwhelm people. And the environment is a terrible challenge, too, not to mention armed violence and the collapse or the capture of different government entities. This is certainly made more serious by international crime, transnational crime, where boys, girls, and adolescents are terribly threatened, and we need to see it here. This committee and this room is the only, or may be the only link for victims and potential victims to see a way out. It's that clear. This commission, therefore, must be even more effective than it has been thus far. And for that to take place, I think that my experience in civil society and in drumming up the funds necessary may be a help. That is something I can bring, I think. And precautionary measures might help. We could look at what used to be the European Commission, doesn't exist anymore, how we can reinforce the admissibility criteria and underscore the responsible use of AI. Because what I'm saying is this: once you've got clear criteria, you may have a much better way forward to deal with cases. When it is systematic and when it is effective, when I'm sitting here talking about the Commission, and the communication has to be systematic, both with states and the victims themselves. This has been a recurrent thing in every one of your statements. We have to protect that. That will also mean being sure that we align the priorities of this mission with the most urgent human rights challenges in the region. We have to be strategic in recognizing the need to protect democratic institutions and the civic space. To protect democracy in the civic space, in those groups, it's not only for the individual rights, it is to preserve the very environment in which human rights can be exercised. That's as big as that is. And these are the three priorities that speak to me and that I gave you. Protecting the most vulnerable and the democratic rights. Make sure that communication is transparent, effective, and that these universal rights become the rights of all. I have seen, while working with victims of racism, of homophobia, and of attacks to religious freedom, a very great deal. I've learned a lot, too, working with the environment, people who are out there fighting for the environment. And what about women who are victims of violence? Every one of these people want to make a difference. And at the end of the day, dear friends, what they want for that to happen is for those voices to be heard, not to be exclusive, but inclusive and more participatory. We need to be open. We in the Commission need to be very open. First of all, to look at concrete evidence of violence, of violations, I should say, to the protocol that the Inter-American system has approved. And we must equally affirm and protect the rights of all LGBTI plus people, Amero and indigenous groups, African groups, all kinds of different groups that are subject to this kind of ongoing discrimination. Article 3 of the Inter-American Declaration of Human Rights is very clear. The two consultative opinions that at the present time are before the Inter-American Court, FYI, have as their key the principle of due diligence. For what? So that reasonable measures can be taken, so that measures in good time can be taken against private actors. And frankly, with regard to arms, be much clearer regulating not only the manufacturing of weapons, but their commerce. From an environmental standpoint, the measures that have to be taken in order to see danger coming. The Declaration on the Environment is a multiplier for human rights, and the Caribbean, most in particular, as all of you know, is on the front line of that ongoing threat.
When it acts preventively rather than punitively. That is why I'm committed to strengthening follow-up and compliance with its recommendations by reinforcing monitoring tools on the ground and deepening dialogue with the states. Finally, my scientific training has taught me not to speculate or assume, but to verify, compare, and decide based on evidence. I work with data and rigorous analysis. In times of ideological divides, I believe in reasoned decision-making grounded in law and objective assessment of reality. If anything, remember this. This is my commitment: to act strictly within the framework of verified evidence, in line with the instruments of the Inter-American system, respectful of the constitutional framework of your democratic states, and with a victim-centered approach. This method reduces space for speculation and polarization, facilitates dialogue and consensus, and enables us to focus on our core mission, which is protecting the people of the Americas and effectively advising this organization. Mi padre dio su vida por los derechos humanos.
My father gave his life for human rights, and he was well aware that this goes above and beyond race, politics, religion, or culture. And that is the example that guides me and my ongoing inspiration, if you ask me to help me guide you. Thank you. Carlos Bernal Pulido is recognized now. Thank you so much, Chair. Let me begin by expressing my own thanks to the ambassadors, male and female, for these really stellar questions. 4 years would probably be just the beginning of time available to answer these, as they warrant an answer. Unfortunately, I've only got 7 minutes, so I'm going to do my best. And I've got 7 main points, as it happens. It's interesting to see how things may look very different and may not be so different. Argentina and Honduras both talked about the lack of trust, the lack of confidence, and lack of neutrality and objectivity, call it what you will, that one very often senses or suspects within the Inter-American Commission. This was the point made. And on that score, I would say 3 things that I think are key. 1, the Commission must be absolutely rigorous, applying the rules, the conventional rules that guide us here, which are the ones the states themselves have ratified and approved. That's 1. 2, action must be based on proof, on hard evidence. And 3, there has to be an ongoing fidelity to the mandate. And I totally agree with the ambassador of Argentina who mentioned here, including the question of religious freedom. And for those of you who might be interested, I would add, interested in my point of view, I would be very happy to send you, should you be interested, in what I wrote in my dissident voice on that report on freedom of religion, because I voted against it. Now I'd like to turn to what the ambassador for Bolivia was saying, which speaks to collegiality. And I would say the following. Look, collegiality is essential. We get that. But here's the thing. Collegiality does not mean unanimity, or unity, I should say. Collegiality and unity are not one and the same thing. Sometimes one must look for consensus. my colleague, my living Colombian colleague said, Maria Claudia Galin said, you know, sometimes you can spend hours, not to say days, going round and round, really killing yourself trying to find a way forward. And believe me, I have worked as a magistrate of the Colombian Constitutional Court. I know what she says, and I know the rub. But sometimes, let me say with the greatest respect, those who generate the norms, the standards, the rules of procedure of the vote left room for a reasoned vote. There's a reason for it, no pun intended. You know, opinions may be offered that are partial and that could, in a particular instance, go and change the system. That's what the U.S. delegate referred to as tangible reforms. The speaker uses this in English, quoting the original English. Tangible reforms. Well, yes, indeed, that can happen. So it isn't just questions of substance that can make the difference. And Jeremy Walton, the NYU law professor and a good friend, Democracy and Disagreements, has pretty much said it all. So, too, the reasoned votes, dissident votes of the Supreme Court of the United States, which is another, when the question was, should they change the rules of procedure? Ruth Ginsburg spoke to this, and Shelby Campy also spoke with regard to the votes as to women. These is by way of example, as a footnote. Let me go to point 2. What are the agenda items? Yes, climate change, of course. But there's more than that. What about the objectives that we want to consider with regard to climate change? Energy sustainability. In the case of Haiti, for instance. How about the case of the rights of persons with vulnerability? The ambassador for Grenada rightly spoke to this. This has to be a priority. And others too, like the ambassador of Colombia mentioned, with regard, for instance, as to how we might regulate artificial intelligence and other new technologies that are coming down the pike. And further, I think we states would do well to learn from the magnificent lesson that the Constitutional Court of South Africa has spoken about, and the speaker has used the term in English as used by the South African court. Here it is, meaningful engagement. This is the key set of words. It isn't just going on and talking. It means bring people in. Make them a part of the decision in a very real way. So, too, with regard to how such decisions are going to be implemented in the long run, I think that has to be the way to go. The states know more than anyone how to resolve these human rights dilemmas. The one thing that the Commission has got to do, I think, is to be useful in a veritable engagement and question, but not in any imposition. Fifthly, I would say, with regard to, and I don't know whether you know this, but the margin of appreciation is what saved the human rights, the European human rights system. And next, how to work to tackle the backlog, procedural backlog. Costa Rica, I think, mentioned, and usefully so, there has to be a system that might be a better way to make use of artificial intelligence. And perhaps the unanimous rejection of a couple of petitions, and why not, turning again to the European Court of Human Rights, the so-called pilot cases, that is, cases that are very like each other, that are so like each other that, hey, guess what? In those cases, there's a solution that applies to the rest of them. And the few minutes, I should say seconds, 40-second seconds that are left has to do with the budget. Here's what I want to say, bottom line. In the case of scarcity, that is when institutions such as the IACHR really bring a value added. The IACHR adds value. It doesn't mean simply that they may point to a solution. They add value as to how you deal with the issues. And that, I think, in the long run, is what's going to make it or break it. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, says the chair, very much to each of you who took the floor and those for the candidates who are up here for the 25-29 group. We have now met the mandate of 3048, and I close this special session of today. And before I adjourn, I would, however, like to invite you to come to the 2:30 plenary session of the council. Thanks so much for being here. The meeting stands adjourned.